So we'll record this and get it to the people who might miss today. Right. So all this work to get to this cup here, right? I didn't put it in the kiln just straight off the bat. So there's a lot of lead-in time to see how the clay works, right? So the different clays that I have, there's this, the Iowa clay that, that I found at my in-laws' creek bed, right? And you can see the difference in color as you get to a higher temperature. The red clay, the red color is from iron in the clay, and it will affect the color more as you get to higher temperatures, right? So the gloss on this clay body here is from the iron fluxing out and other materials in the clay body fluxing out too. So the different temperatures of clay that I went through was at a lower quotation marks, get it on camera, is around 2000 degrees, and then slowly working my way up to about 2300. Right, so this is a 300-degree difference between this firing and this firing here. So it's really telling. You know, there's all sorts of little nuances in temperature of clay. Normally around cone 4 to 6. If people are familiar with cones, has that been explained to people, right? We have temperature cones that melt at certain degrees inside the kiln, and that's how we'll measure the temperature inside of the wood kiln, right? The little cones will bend over, and that will be our reading of temperature. So in ceramic terms, are like 2000 degrees is cone 1, right? And then it works all the way up to 332 Fahrenheit, which is cone 10. And in the electric kilns, there are preset temperatures like cone 1, cone 3, cone 6, that's cone 5, cone 6, cone 8, and then cone 10 in the electric kiln, right? So just slowly working my way up and seeing how the clay body responds to temperature. So one really notable difference is between cone 6 and cone 8 when things start to flux out. And typically iron will flux out around cone 4 to cone 6, which is around 2150 to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So the interesting thing about the clay body that I dug in that creek bed is that it's pretty stable even at high temperature, which is really kind of exciting, because without even processing it through a sieve, it turns out really nice with this cup right here, right? So is that food safe? It's food safe. Yeah. So it's vitrified, it's watertight, you know, microwave.
It, like, what does it add to it that makes it, like, you just make it so it's easier for higher temperatures?
It'll take out the other organic bits like twigs, roots. So if you look closely on this, you can see root marks because I didn't process this, but I have a little thing set up over here. I'll show you guys how to process something really quickly. But processing also takes out the large bits of iron here like there's some shale that can melt and pit, which is kind of nice, but it could pit all the way through and then you get like a hole. So I was pretty lucky on this, but there's another iron pit right there that kind of pushed out. Yeah, good question. Right, we'll get to processing later. So we have the Iowa clay blend here, and then we have 3 different clay blends that were shipped from North Carolina. There's a clay company out in North Carolina that it's a small run operation, and they find natural clay veins in the area. And North Carolina has some of the largest clay deposits in the United States. Same with South Carolina. That's where the clay shifted from the glacier melt from the ice age, right? So kind of interesting stuff. Mitch and Zoe know more about that, and they'll talk more about that during their presentation. If they don't, I'll be sure to ask a question, right? So there are 3 different clay blends from North Carolina. There's a wild, they call wild, quotation mark, porcelain. There's a mix that they call Grogaweni, which is a blend, it's like 50% wild clay that they have, and then with other materials that are similar to our B clay that we use here. And then this is called the Dark Star, and this is dug straight from the ground, and is also another iron bearing clay body. What is interesting about the iron bearing clay bodies, the Iowa and the Dark Star, is that it's very similar at high temperature, right? So they have that gloss, that sheen a little bit, and
iron deposit in the one from North Carolina.
Yep.
Carolinas. So
yep, lots of iron.
Because Iowa soil is like ideal for farming, as all Midwest is.
Yep.
And then the Carolinas, you see that it's just different.
Yep. Yeah.
So I wondered if like the iron base that's in the Iowa clay has to do with like farming, agriculture, or
It could be. There were a lot of tobacco plantations down in the Carolinas, right? So maybe not quite as much corn, but they grow a lot of tobacco down there. So, I mean, that would be a good question for the owner of the company who does this sort of thing. So again, running through the temperature tests just to see how things flux out. And I know for a fact this clay holds up to our wood fire kiln, the Dark Star, and which is really promising to make something with the Iowa clay and see what happens with that, right? And then there are some other pieces over here that I blended together just to see how much, if you blend all the clays together, what kind of effects do you get? How does the material move? What does it feel like, right? So taking all of these different clays and blending them together, you do get a different clay body. So with the porcelain, it's rather interesting, the difference in color from low temperature, which is really white, to high temperature. So clay is predominantly a blend of alumina and silica, and glass melts at around, or it gets soft around like 1400 degrees. So the alumina is a high temperature material. It melts at really high temperatures. So that's what it has in the clay to make it go up to be stable at 2300 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And then this is a fun little thing. that I just kind of found in the studio. Does that look familiar to anybody?
Looks like a wasp.
There you go. Right. So it's a little mud dauber nest. And so every once in a while, I'll put these in a kiln and see how it turns out. And the wasps made this out of clay deposit. Right. So it's fired up to cone 1. And in researching what mud daubers are also called, they're nicknamed potter wasps. So, you know, if you can,
So actual wasp made that.
yeah, right. So, yeah, they're huge, right? But they're pretty like harmless, interesting insects. They'll eat spiders and things like that. But the connection between, like, you know, we're using clay in here to make pots versus like the small little insects making pots for their homes, right? So it got me going on an idea for making a piece that I'll show you guys later in the semester. That's pretty fun. So what I have for you guys is I took out the clay, and we have enough clay balls for every person to get one of these. So that the dark clay here is the Iowa clay that I got from the creek. This is the porcelain. This is the Grogaweni, and this is the dark star from North Carolina, right? So if people could come up, take one of these, and I'll run you through how to like feel the material and stuff like that and do tests, right? So come on up and grab a ball of each, because we'll test plasticity. You'll feel how different the material is between each clay. Right? Each clay is a little different.
Let's take one of each.
Yep, take one of each. Okay. We'll have more tests if people want to give it a shot. Again. It's just in time. Here, grab a ball of clay each. All right, so these are all those wild clay clays that I've been talking about. And this is the Iowa one right here. Right. So don't blend any of these together, but we'll I think we'll start with the dark star, and a quick test for this is, you know, just being able to squeeze it in between your hands and then making a coil. And to test plasticity, if you can wrap the coil around your finger without it cracking, it's a good sign of plasticity. I mean, what has already been happening with the clay, it's been put through a pug mill with a vacuum. So it's already pretty processed, right? If you can pull it apart, it doesn't tear. Right? It doesn't have those tear marks that come with it. It, you know, has a real soft feel to it, and it's fairly wet. Right? So just kind of feeling out that clay body. And then with these, like how I like to make little test pieces is just pinching a small little ball. Right? So we make a ball and pinch around, you can see and feel like how the material moves, right? So it's a fairly stiff clay. It's probably has some fire clay in there, right? There's different types of clay bodies. There's fire clay, which is a larger particle size, which is typically like a brick clay. There's ball clay, which is a more finer clay body. And then there's kaolin, which the porcelain is made up of predominantly is kaolin, which is really, really loose, right? So moving on to the Grogaweni, you can do the same thing.
Where did they come up with that name?
It's a local name it's a blended name between the Native Americans and the of the area, and then they put a whole bunch of grog in there, so they just Grogaweni, right? So this is a pretty good sculpture clay body. Both of these are pretty similar, right? Feel pretty similar in your hands. Both of these would work for large scale. So if you're going to make like a large vase with these, it would work really well, right? And when I'm pinching this clay together, I can really feel the material between my thumb and forefinger, and it keeps its shape really nicely, right? So with the added grog in there, it creates just a little bit more structure. Like our B mix, our B clay doesn't have that grog in there. So while it's plastic like B clay, it's still, it has a little bit of extra structure with the grog. So the porcelain is a little squirrely, right? The particle size is really loose. It doesn't have a really built structure into it. It doesn't have the grog. It doesn't have the fire clay. Right? Yeah, that's what's called thixotropic, right? So like having things, it's a solid if you don't touch it, but as soon as you start moving it, like when you start making your pinch pot and it gets a little thin, it will stay in motion just a little bit longer, right? So it's a real tough material to work with, right? So even just, making
Like a rubber.
this pinch pot, it feels like rubber, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's really loose. It doesn't hold up quite so well as the other clays, but people like using it because of its white clay result, right? And then moving to the Iowa clay, which is really impressive because it can roll this into a coil. It has structure, and if I wrap it around my finger, I don't have any cracking or anything like that, right? So it's a really well-aged clay deposit, what I found, and I'm really excited. Like, we'll see if Mitch talks about it next. Hello, Brandon. Next class, because Mitch is also from Iowa, and I was talking to him about the clay find that I had, and he was assuming that it would melt at low temperatures, right? It did, right? So it's kind of like found clay, but I found gold.
Right.
You're sharing
What's that?
it with
All part of the
us.
state.
Atumwa. Which again, like we'll have to pick Mitch's brain about it because he has a whole like almost the whole United States mapped out, like where clay deposits are and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about that, right? So any questions about what you guys have going on there, right? Cool. So you guys have the pinch pots made, and we can bisque fire these and then fire them in the test kiln, right? Or not fire them in the test kiln, fire them in the gas kiln. So these go all the way up to cone 10, right? And we also, I have a couple bags of these, right? So I got the porcelain right here just to show you where it is, right? So the couple bags that I have are just right over here, right? So I got 2 bags of each. I got 2 bags of the Grogaweni, 2 bags of the wild porcelain, 2 bags of the dark star. And unfortunately, the Iowa clay I don't have too much of. So I'll put some tests in the wood kiln and see how that comes out. And then if they look good, I'll maybe go dig up some more clay and have it for next semester. So if you want to,
Winter's coming.
winter's coming. I know.
The ground's like freezing.
I'll
Well,
get-
it isn't right now, but by the end of the semester, it'll
Right.
start to freeze.
I'll get to the in-laws before then. Right.
Hopefully.
The one thing, right? Yeah, he's got a backup. So they shipped us some really wet clay. If you can, see my hands, right? So there's enough clay for people to make like a 2-pound cup or 2-pound bowl from each bag, right? And with the wood firing coming up, if you guys want to put the clay in that firing, this is the firing to do it, right? So it's kind of like a nice, like holistic thing, right? The clay is dug from the ground, it's unprocessed, we'll be firing with wood. So it's all kind of handmade. And it's just a real nice process, right? So what I'm doing with the porcelain is just mixing it together. I'm blending that water in and moving some of the water out, right? So this is where hand mixing is really helpful for this sort of thing, right? And if things are really wet, then you can take your hand mixed clay, make it a rainbow, and put it down in front of the fan and let it dry for like 15 minutes in front of the fan, and then it'll be ready to work, right? Because the porcelain is really wet, the Grogaweni and the dark star is also really wet, so it'd be good to dry these out. So
Do they do that because it's easier to ship?
I'm not sure.
Maybe,
It could have
like,
been,
stays fresh.
yeah,
Add a little water to it. Maybe.
it could have been, especially if they're shipping to us, because I doubt they would sell it like this,
It probably takes like a week
right?
to get here when they place the order.
Yeah, yeah. It came here like in 2 days.
Oh,
Right. So, I mean, part of it also is my friend works for the company. So it was a nice call. He just started working there. So you can keep your friends close and then keep your friends who work at ceramic distributors even closer. Right. That's how I work that. Right. So please, feel free to grab a couple pounds of each bag, 2 pounds each, and make some cups, right? That's for you guys to use. And any questions about that? Right?
Like, what would be the highest temperature? But like, what would you, like, you're saying, like, I think the highest I've ever seen is like 2,500.
Yeah,
You took it up to like 5,000.
yeah, that's
What would
like,
happen?
that's like
Just melt.
chemical, that's chemical engineering. That's like ceramics that they're making to go on space shuttle. Like, no
So-
joke.
So it just
Yeah.
gets harder and harder and harder. Or,
Yeah, yeah, that's like scientific ceramics, right?
yeah,
What's that,
like,
Zach? Yeah, yeah, like alumina doesn't melt until like 3,500 degrees or something like that. So they'll add other things in there to stiffen things up.
so
But for
just-
wood firing, we would just go to 2,300.
Just for curious, like, put a ball of clay in the glass.
Oh, and
Yeah.
one, Christopher would hate me for life.
No, not that you'd actually do
But
it.
it
What would
would,
actually happen?
it would just sit, it would be a rock, right? So
Just-
if you put in
Right.
the wet clay, it would blow up because
Well,
of
no, I'm talking
steam.
like you let it dry.
If you
and
let it
actually
dry,
Put a piece in at that highest temperature.
It would
those
just
get up
sink
like
to the
5,000
bottom.
degrees.
yeah, it would just sink to the bottom, right? Those get up to like 2,100 degrees, and we fire our kilns to 2,300. So
Hmm.
yeah, it would just,
I was just curious.
Yeah.
You would say that,
right.
you know, the Iowa clay held up to higher temperatures than you were expecting. I was like,
Yeah.
what would be the cutoff temperature of that? I mean,
2,400,
5,000 degrees.
right? 2,400, I would say. Anything over 2,300, we don't really need to go into the wood fire, right? Yeah, and we'll just kind of, that will be max temperature, right? So speaking of wood fire, I do want to take you guys over next door to talk about wadding and glazing and stuff, so we can start prepping for that. So does anyone have any questions about clay? Okay, well, let's head next door.